Welcome back, focused learners. We're jumping right into another explainer today, and honestly, we're going on a totally fascinating macro to micro journey. We've all heard that old saying, right? You are what you eat. But how often do we actually stop to visualize how a piece of food, something just grown out in the field somewhere, literally transforms into the thoughts racing through our minds right now? Well, today, we are tracing that exact path. We're going to break down the incredible biological processing plant operating inside your body, look at exactly what your brain is demanding from your diet, understand why we crave the things we crave, and finally, take a hard look at the agricultural labels on the food we're buying.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Our explainer today follows a clear four-part structure. First, the journey of a bite. Second, fueling the hungry brain. Third, the sugar dopamine trap. And finally, the truth about organic.
So, Part 1. The journey of a bite. Going from mechanical chewing straight into the chemical factory of your gut.
I want you to just imagine taking a huge bite out of a turkey sandwich, or maybe popping a fresh grape into your mouth. The very second you do that, you trigger a highly sophisticated biological processing plant. But what actually happens when you swallow? It seems so simple, but it is this incredibly precise mechanical operation. Right at the back of your throat, there's a flexible flap called the epiglottis. It essentially acts as a vital switch. Usually, it permits air into your airway down to your lungs. But the literal millisecond, you swallow that bite of food, it flips down to block the airway, forcing the food safely into your swallowing tube, the esophagus.
Now, here is a wild, maybe slightly gross fact. Even before you swallow, chemical digestion has already started, all thanks to a staggering amount of saliva. And I mean staggering. The volume of saliva a human produces in a single year could literally fill 2 medium-sized bathtubs. Crazy, right? And it's not just water. This pool of drool contains an absolutely crucial enzyme called amylase that jumps right in and begins the chemical breakdown of carbohydrates while the food is still in your mouth.
Once that chewed-up food enters the esophagus, gravity actually isn't doing the heavy lifting here. What you're experiencing is a process called peristalsis. The muscles in the walls of your digestive tract literally squeeze behind the food and relax in front of it, actively pushing it down into the stomach. And your stomach, it's basically a powerful, muscular sac filled with acid. Its whole job is to act as a heavy-duty blender. Through some really intense muscle action, it grinds your meal down into tiny particles no larger than 3 millimeters across, turning the whole thing into a highly acidic mash.
So, following the complete roadmap of this journey, we start in the mouth, travel down the esophagus, and hit the stomach blender. From there, that acidic mash is slowly emptied into the small intestine, which is where the nutrient absorption happens. Whatever is left over then moves into the large intestine, the colon, where trillions, yes trillions, of good bacteria extract the very last vitamins and pull out the water. Finally, about 36 hours after you took that first bite, the remaining waste drops into the rectum, sending a signal to your brain that it's probably time to find a bathroom.
But what's really mind-blowing about this entire system is the sheer scale of the small intestine. If you were to somehow uncoil it, it would be over 20 feet in length, literally as long as a giraffe is tall. And it's all just stuffed right there inside your abdomen. This 20-foot tube is kind of like a warm, tropical resort flooded with bile from your liver and enzymes from your pancreas. This is the spot where your food is definitively stripped of its nutrients, which are absorbed directly into your bloodstream.
All right, moving to part 2, fueling the hungry brain. This is where we see how your dietary choices directly dictate your mental state.
So, once those nutrients are finally circulating in your blood, the organ making the absolute highest demands on them is sitting right inside your skull. Just think about this contrast for a second. The human brain makes up only about 2% of our total body weight, yet it aggressively consumes up to 20% of our entire energy resources. It is an absolute energy hog. Actually, the frontal lobes are so incredibly sensitive to drops in blood sugar that a change in your mental function is usually the very first signal of a nutrient deficiency.
If we were to dehydrate your brain, we'd find out it's mostly made of fats, specifically superstar lipids like omegas 3 and 6, which we absolutely have to get from eating things like nuts, seeds, and fatty fish. You've also got proteins and amino acids in there, which are crucial because they contain the actual precursors to your neurotransmitters, meaning they literally manipulate your mood, your sleep, and your attentiveness. Then we have micronutrients, things like antioxidants from fruits and veggies that fight off free radicals, plus B vitamins that help prevent mental decline. And finally, the brain needs fuel, pure and simple, and that comes in the form of glucose, processed from the carbohydrates we eat.
And this brilliantly illustrates why all carbs are definitely not created equal when it comes to fueling your brain.
If you eat a high glycemic food like, say, a slice of white bread, your brain gets this rapid, massive release of glucose. But that's immediately followed by a steep crash. Your blood sugar just shoots down, taking your attention span and your mood right along with it. That's that sudden post-lunch apathy we all know so well. But if you choose low glycemic carbs like oats or legumes, the higher fiber content slows that glucose release down, giving your brain steady, sustained attentiveness. Ultimately, it all comes down to the ratio of sugar to fiber in your meal.
Which brings us to part 3, the sugar dopamine trap, or why we literally cannot resist dessert.
So if our brain needs a nice, steady supply of energy, why are we so universally drawn to the exact foods that cause those massive spikes and crashes? Well, to understand this, we have to talk about dopamine. Dopamine is a super important neurotransmitter that acts as the major currency of your brain's reward system. Its primary job is to answer one fundamental, subconscious question: should I do that again? When you take a bite of cake, the sugar activates sweet taste receptors on your tongue, and amazingly, even down in your gut, sending a massive signal up to your cerebral cortex, flooding you with dopamine and saying, yes, absolutely do that again.
Now you have to look at how the brain manages this reward system over time. If you eat a healthy, balanced meal many days in a row, the dopamine response naturally levels out. From an evolutionary standpoint, your brain is basically making familiar food boring, so you'll be forced to seek out a variety of nutrients to survive. But sugar? Sugar is evolutionarily really rare. So when you eat sugar-rich food, that dopamine response just does not level out. It stays in continuous overdrive. Sugar behaves a little bit like an addictive drug, totally bypassing the brain's natural leveling mechanism and causing these constant, intense cravings. Let's look at part 4, the truth about organic. Let's uncover the reality behind those grocery store labels.
So we know how food fuels the brain, and we definitely know how sugar tricks it, but what about how that food is actually grown in the first place? Looking impartially at the data comparing organic to conventional farming, the results are kind of surprising, to be honest. Organic farming avoids synthetic fertilizers and GMOs, relying heavily on traditional methods. But nutritionally, studies show only very small differences. They are largely equal across the board. Environmentally, organic uses less energy, which is great, but conventional farming actually wins on land use, simply because organic farming requires quite a bit more land to produce the exact same amount of crop.
So, the really crucial point of debate here is usually about pesticides. And it is true that organic produce has less pesticide residue, but it is absolutely not pesticide-free. Organic farmers still use pesticides. They are just natural toxins, like copper sulfate, rather than synthetic ones. And here is the golden toxicity rule we all need to remember. Toxic is toxic. The danger of any substance depends entirely on its concentration and your exposure to it, not whether it was manufactured in a lab or derived from nature. In fact, organic copper sulfate can sometimes be more harmful to humans than certain synthetics. The data essentially shows that the trace amounts of highly regulated pesticides you might find on conventional vegetables are generally nothing to lose sleep over.
So where exactly does that leave us? Well, the evidence pretty strongly suggests that an organic label is really more of a manufacturing notice, not some magical silver bullet for your diet or the environment. The most practical takeaway from all of this data is surprisingly simple. Eating fruits and vegetables of any kind is vastly more important than how they were produced. Period. And if you truly want to benefit both your personal health and the environment, buy a local food that's currently in season. As the quote perfectly summarizes, seasonal is the true organic.
We followed the entire journey today, from the soil straight down the food chute, getting churned through the acid blender of the stomach, absorbed into that massive 20-foot intestine, and finally sent all the way up to fuel the most energy-hungry organ in your entire body. Every single bite you take serves as a building block for your cellular membranes and your neurotransmitters. So I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. Knowing exactly how this incredible machine inside you works, what will your brain choose for your very next meal? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, Focus Learners, and I will catch you in the next one.